On October 20th, 1983, a United Press International Wire report moved across newsrooms in Nashville, New York, and Los Angeles. This was not a standard review or a celebrity profile, but rather a summary of a Tennessee Court of Appeals ruling that carried a heavy legal weight. Buried deep within the formal language sat a 4-word finding that functioned like a corporate execution order, stating that Bobby Goldsboro was not a proper person. There was no criminal charge and no conviction to speak of, yet a simple civil custody filing and a judge's assessment proved to be enough. The real question worth asking is not whether the court reached the right conclusion in that moment. Instead, we must look at what happened the second that finding entered the public record and identify who in the music industry was already holding the paperwork to act on it. To understand the erasure of a legacy, you first have to understand exactly what was being erased from the cultural landscape. Back in 1968, Bobby Goldsboro recorded Honey in a single take in Minneapolis, and the song went on to spend 5 consecutive weeks at #1 on the Billboard Hot 100. It topped the country charts and eventually outsold every other record on the planet that year, which meant it even outperformed the Beatles' Hey Jude. Goldsboro placed 29 consecutive singles on the Billboard charts and hosted the highest-rated syndicated variety show of the decade, all while building House of Gold music into a massive publishing operation. By the mid-1970s, his global record sales reached an estimated 35 million copies. This was not just a successful career, but a massive commercial infrastructure that relied on a legal foundation most people never bothered to read. When Goldsboro signed with United Artists Records in the 1960s, his contract reflected the standard industry practice where the label held perpetual ownership of the master recordings. Since Honey was written by Bobby Russell rather than Goldsboro himself, the artist controlled neither the composition nor the publishing on his own signature hit. The label owned the product and the masters, but the real danger lived in the boilerplate language regarding termination rights. These rights could be triggered by any conduct that brought the artist into public disrepute, contempt, scandal, or ridicule. That specific language was common in every major label contract of the era, but this is where the clean image trap closed around an artist like Goldsboro. When the Rolling Stones faced arrests, it actually helped them sell more records. And when modern stars shed their innocent personas, it often generates a new phase of their career. Rebellion-branded artists can absorb scandal because their audience expects it, but Goldsboro's commercial identity was built entirely on moral authority and domestic tenderness. Songs like Honey and Watching Scotty Grow were more than just music. They were brand promises that the audience trusted. Once a brand promise like that is broken, it does not just lose its value, but it actually inverts and becomes a massive liability for the corporation. His chart decline had already started well before 1983, as his last top 40 entry appeared a full decade before the court records surfaced. The commercial machinery was already slowing down, but while a slow machine can be restarted, an uninsurable one simply gets scrapped for parts. The legal machinery that effectively erased Bobby Goldsboro from the public consciousness did not require a criminal conviction or even a formal statement from his record label. Instead, the entire process relied on a single standard clause buried deep within a contract he signed long before his hit song, Honey, ever reached #1. We are going to show you exactly how that mechanism worked and why it remains so effective today. The court finding against Goldsboro did not actually cause his erasure, but it did provide the necessary authorization for it to happen. 3 specific mechanisms were already built into the system, and each one functioned perfectly without the need for a press release or a courtroom drama. The first mechanism involved using the morality clause as a standard termination protocol. Label contracts during the 1960s and 70s were designed so that a company did not have to formally fire an artist to end their career. Labels simply stopped doing the work, which meant they stopped exercising options and refused to allocate any more money to promotional budgets. By the early 1980s, Goldsboro had moved over to RCA Records, and this deal happened to coincide exactly with his divorce proceedings becoming public knowledge. While no paper trail connects a specific clause to a specific date, that lack of evidence is actually the point of the system. These clauses did not function as legal weapons for a fight, but rather as permission slips for the label to walk away. The moment the risk of being associated with child-related allegations appeared, every small decision about which singles to push or which television bookings to confirm quietly resolved against him. There was no big announcement or public firing, but only a growing silence where the promotion used to be. The second mechanism turned his master recordings and publishing rights into a form of hostage infrastructure. Goldsboro's most famous adult songs stayed exactly where they had always been, under the total control of the label. The United Artists catalog eventually passed through EMI and into the hands of massive corporate successors who decided whether those recordings would ever appear in movies or new compilations. When an artist is labeled a reputational liability, they have no legal way to force a corporation to use their music or promote their brand. A performer cannot sue a company for simply deciding not to use a product they own, so the royalty stream does not stop because of a judge. It stops because of corporate indifference, which is the cleanest tool in the industry because it leaves the artist with nothing to appeal in court. This is the part of the business that rarely gets discussed in public. The scandal itself did not physically destroy the recordings, but it made those masters radioactive to the people who actually owned them. A corporate successor, managing a catalog worth hundreds of millions of dollars, has no financial reason to link their assets to a name that carries a heavy reputational risk. The masters do not disappear from the vault, but they stop generating any income for the person whose voice is actually on the tapes. The third mechanism involved using the children's entertainment sector as the only available vault for his work. When Goldsboro launched The Swamp Critters of Lost Lagoon on PBS in 1995, he wrote every script and played every instrument himself. While this looked like a creative reinvention to the public, the reality was that it functioned as a form of professional triage. Children's programming in the early 1990s operated under a completely different gatekeeping system than the rest of the industry. The buyers for PBS and the Disney Channel were not looking for a 1983 Tennessee court decision the way radio programmers or primetime bookers were. This sector of the industry had a massive gap in its awareness, and Goldsboro used that gap to keep working. He chose to self-finance through Bobby Goldsboro Productions because he knew that no outside investors would touch a project tied to his name. By controlling the money himself, he was able to keep ownership of the intellectual property, which was the only commercial asset he had left. This structure was not a sign of creative independence, but rather a move of legal necessity. The children's sector was not a place he chose to go because he wanted to, but because it was the only room in the building that was not locked. The modern version of this system is still in place today. Current 360-degree deals give labels the same total control over a performer's identity that morality clauses achieved back in the 1980s. The ongoing fights within the Screen Actors Guild over digital likeness are just the latest version of the same power struggle. The industry is still trying to decide who holds the right to determine when a performer becomes a liability. The answer has stayed the same for decades, as the label and the studio always hold the power through the contract. The most important thing to understand about these three mechanisms is that the industry did not erase Bobby Goldsboro because he was a danger to society. They erased him because his brand had become uninsurable. A label does not ever need to prove guilt when they can simply calculate the risk instead. No criminal charges were ever filed and no conviction ever came, which left the case in a strange legal limbo. Even the court noted that the judge did not fully believe either side, but corporate silence quickly replaced the need for a formal verdict. This meant no promotion and no reissues, as the industry effectively issued its own ruling without ever stepping back into a courtroom. The clean image that made Bobby Goldsboro worth building was the exact same architecture that eventually made him worth discarding. If you want more investigations into the legal machinery behind these Hollywood erasures, subscribe and share this with someone who still thinks the music industry runs on talent.